"You don't belong in this house, Martha." That sentence split the morning open like a crack through glass. I was 74, standing in the kitchen that had once been mine, the same kitchen where I had laughed with Daniel over burnt toast, where the scent of coffee filled every corner, where the ticking clock felt like a heartbeat. The man at the doorway was his brother, Mark, carrying a locksmith's kit and a folded letter. The sun was soft on the floorboards, and for a moment I believed the warmth would protect me. It didn't. I asked, "What are you doing with that?" He smiled the way people do when they're about to hurt you politely. "It's for your safety," he said. "The lawyer advised new locks. Too many memories, you know." I stared at the keys clinking in his hand, each small sound cutting through the quiet. The smell of dust lifted from the curtains when he closed the windows. That house had always spoken in tiny sounds, the kettle's sigh, Daniel's humming, my own footsteps tracing the same path from stove to table. Now every sound was foreign, belonging to someone else. He handed me an envelope. My name was written carefully, the handwriting almost kind. I opened it. The paper trembled in my hands. "This is a legal notice," I whispered. He shrugged. "It's just a formality. You'll have time to gather your things." I laughed then, one short, sharp breath. "This is my home." He looked past me to the hallway. "Not anymore. Daniel didn't leave clear instructions, and the family wants to settle the estate properly." The words estate and family twisted together like vines around a throat. I felt my pulse in my ears. The letter smelled faintly of old paper and ink, and behind that, the dry scent of dust. Somewhere outside, a sparrow knocked against the window, confused by its own reflection. "Mark," I said quietly, "Daniel trusted me with everything. You know that." He didn't answer. The locksmith, a young man who couldn't meet my eyes, stepped in and unpacked his tools. The first click of metal against the lock sounded final. I stepped aside, because dignity was all I had left. My hands touched the family portrait on the wall. Daniel's smile, Mark's hand on his shoulder, mine in the middle. I tried to remember that moment, the warmth of it, but all I could feel was the chill creeping from the open door. When they were finished, Mark turned the new key once, twice, testing. "You'll get your copy when things are sorted." "Sorted?" I repeated. "You mean when I'm gone?" He didn't deny it. He just closed the door gently, as if he were tucking a child to sleep. For a long time, I stood there with the letter in my hand. The clock ticked. The coffee on the stove had gone cold, leaving a bitter smell that clung to everything. The air felt thick with absence. From the porch, Mrs. Clark watched. She lived across the street, her small figure framed by a gate heavy with ivy. Our eyes met. She didn't say anything, but her face, creased with pity, told me she had heard every word. She had always been the quiet keeper of this street, the one who noticed when curtains changed color or flowers wilted too soon. Now she was my witness, though she didn't know it yet. I wanted to scream, to tell her to call someone, but there was nothing illegal about cruelty dressed as paperwork. The law was on their side, or at least pretending to be. Inside, I walked through each room, touching furniture like it might speak back. The dining table still had the faint ring from Daniel's mug. The hallway mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized, tired eyes, but not broken yet. I opened the drawers, found small relics of a life, receipts, old photographs, a keychain Daniel once bought me in Florence. I pressed it into my palm until it hurt. That house had been my sanctuary, my proof of belonging. Now, every object inside felt like evidence in a trial I hadn't agreed to. The silence after their footsteps faded was unbearable. Even the dust seemed to hang in accusation. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beneath the cutlery where Daniel used to keep spare keys. My hands shook, but I forced a breath and whispered, "They can take the locks, but they can't rewrite the memories." Outside, the street looked ordinary. Children's bicycles leaned against fences. A dog barked down the block. But the world had tilted. I knew I would have to leave soon. Still, I lingered, tracing the door frame with my fingertips, memorizing the grain of the wood, the tiny scratches Daniel made while moving furniture. Somewhere behind me, the clock struck 9. Time, relentless as truth. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. The sound of the latch was soft, almost kind. I could still smell the dust from the locksmith's drill, fine as ash. I stood there staring at the key in my hand. It was warm from my grip, heavy with history. The metal glinted once in the morning light before I realized the truth. It no longer fit. I held the key, but not the right door. Their laughter echoed where my name once did. It wasn't loud enough to be open mockery, just soft, careful laughter drifting through the hallway of my sister-in-law's house, where I had been staying since the locks changed. I could tell when kindness was a costume. They smiled when I entered a room, but their eyes darted to each other, measuring how long before I'd break. The morning light slanted over the hallway mirror, catching the half-packed boxes on the floor. I saw myself there, tired, holding a bottle of pills Daniel's doctor had prescribed 2 winters ago. The label was faded, but their whispers had already given it a new meaning. "She's not well," one voice murmured. "She forgets things." They had found their weapon, concern. At breakfast, Mark placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've been through a lot, Martha," he said gently. "Maybe see someone professional, just to help you rest." "I rest fine," I replied. He smiled that same polite cruelty as before. "Grief can be confusing. We worry, that's all." I wanted to scream that I wasn't confused. I was angry, but anger doesn't fit neatly into their kind voices. So I nodded, pretending to agree. It was easier than watching them exchange knowing glances. Later that day, I went to the clinic, more out of defiance than need. The air smelled sterile, too clean, like bleach over guilt. The walls hummed faintly, and somewhere a clock ticked too loud. When the nurse handed me a form, she whispered, "We already have your evaluation on file." "My evaluation?" She blinked, realizing the mistake. "I mean, your last visit." "I've never been here before." The silence stretched. I signed the form anyway, because that's what people like me do when they're trying to prove sanity. We cooperate. While I waited, I heard it again. 2 nurses behind the partition. One said softly, "Family says she's been unstable since the funeral." The other replied, "It's sad when they start imagining things." The words walked down the hallway like ghosts. I felt them pass right through me. When the doctor called me in, he already had a file open. "You've been here before, Mrs. Evans?" "No," he frowned. "Strange, there's a report. Standard mental health screening, dated 3 weeks ago." 3 weeks? My throat tightened. "Who signed it?" He glanced at the bottom of the page. "Looks like your signature. Reference ID D041B. My hands trembled. "May I see it?" He hesitated, then turned the paper around. The scrawl was mine, but not mine. A mimicry. The loops too deliberate, the tail of the E curved wrong. "That's not me," I said quietly. He folded the document. "You should speak to your family. Misunderstandings happen." "Do they?" He didn't answer. I walked out, hearing my own footsteps echo down the linoleum corridor. Each step sounded hollow, detached from the person making it. The hallway narrowed in my vision, white walls closing in, air growing thinner. Outside, I sat on the stone bench near the parking lot, staring at the pill bottle in my purse. The wind moved through the trees, scattering dry leaves over the pavement. Somewhere behind me, someone laughed again, a short burst, then gone. They wanted me doubting myself. That was the plan. If I believed I was losing my mind, they could take everything else with ease. Money, home, reputation. I gripped the bottle until it clicked. Inside, the tablets rattled like teeth. I looked up at the clinic sign, the letters glinting in the sun. I wanted to march back in, demand a copy of that report, shout until they understood. But I didn't. I just noted the name on the door and the time, 11:45 a.m., because evidence had to start somewhere. When I returned home, the hallway felt colder. Someone had moved my things again. My mirror shifted 2 inches, my boxes opened. I could feel their fingerprints on everything. The same concern had crept into my room. In the reflection, my face seemed divided, one half calm, the other braced for war. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the next room filled the silence. I realized how sound could betray, how footsteps could become proof of life or madness depending on who was listening. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house sounded deliberate, every whisper rehearsed. When I finally closed my eyes, I saw that forged signature burned into my mind, its curves too clean, its certainty too loud. The next morning, I slipped out early and bought a small notebook. My proof would start there. Names, times, words overheard. If they wanted to paint me as unstable, I'd make sure every lie had a timestamp. Still, the echo of that nurse's whisper clung to me, as if trapped between the clinic walls and my skin. Family says she's been unstable. No, I thought. I've been betrayed, not broken. Someone signed my name, and it wasn't me. He smiled while moving the money. I noticed it the way you notice a crack forming beneath the paint. Slow, quiet, deliberate. The man was Daniel's old business partner, a man who had spoken at the funeral with tears in his eyes and promises in his voice. He said he'd look after me, make sure the estate was handled properly. I should have heard the rehearsal in that word. The first statement arrived on a Monday morning. Plain envelope, faint scent of ink, corners smudged. Inside was a printout, folded twice, from the bank. My name still appeared on the account, but not where it mattered. 4 withdrawals glared from the page: $20,500, $4,000, $3,200, and $1,300. The total came to $11,000, all cleared just days before Daniel's death. I traced each line with my finger, the paper's grain rough beneath my touch. The texture grounded me, stopped me from spinning into disbelief. That money had been for taxes, Daniel said once. Taxes, or maybe payroll. Either way, it wasn't supposed to vanish into smiles. I went to the bank. The marble floors made my footsteps echo louder than I liked. Behind the counter sat a man with kind eyes, older, thinning hair, and the weariness of someone who'd seen too many families fall apart over signatures. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. "I think you already have," I said, and handed him the printout. He read it, then sighed. "This account's been adjusted. See here?" He pointed to a note at the bottom. Reference entry F27A. Authorized signatory changed 2 weeks prior. Changed to whom? Your brother-in-law, Mark Evans. The name hit like a nail hammered into old wood. I didn't approve. "That," he lowered his voice. "It says here there was a joint confirmation. Show me the document. I can't release a copy without a formal request." "Then consider this the request." He hesitated, then disappeared into the back. I stood there, staring at the framed certificates behind the counter. The glass reflected my face, faintly warped. It looked like someone older than I remembered, harder, smaller, but still standing. When he returned, he carried a folder. Inside was the authorization sheet. 2 signatures sat at the bottom, one real, one stolen. "That's not mine," I whispered. He met my eyes. "I figured as much, but I shouldn't even be showing you this." "You are." "Yes," he said quietly, "because you deserve to know." He wrote something on a slip of paper, his name and a phone number, and slid it across the counter. "Keep this. You didn't get it from me, but if anyone asks about withdrawals, reference record F27A. It might help later." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft shuffle of paper as he returned the folder. When I turned to leave, he said, "Be careful, Mrs. Evans. They'll say it's complicated, but it's not. It's theft, dressed in trust." Outside, the air was sharp with cold. I walked to the cafe across the street and sat by the window. The reflection of the bank gleamed on the glass, distorted by raindrops. I pulled the checkbook from my bag and opened it. Daniel's handwriting stopped midway through a list: suppliers, staff, rent, honest words for honest work. I felt him there for a second, steady, calm, unaware of what would come next. I wrote the numbers down: $2,500, $4,000, $3,200, $1,300, then underlined them twice. $11,000. I circled the total and wrote beside it, "Find where it went." The waitress brought me coffee. Its warmth in my hands was the first thing all day that didn't feel artificial. "Long day?" she asked. "Just starting," I said. That night, I couldn't sleep. I spread the papers on my bed like puzzle pieces. Each line of the ledger looked harmless alone, but together they whispered deceit. Daniel's family had turned the word care into control. In the quiet, I could almost hear his voice again, steady, kind, promising that we were safe. I wanted to believe it still, but safety doesn't survive in numbers that don't add up. I packed the documents into a folder, labeled it by hand, proof, reference F27A, and locked it in the drawer beside my bed. My reflection in the window stared back, steady now, a little colder. They thought I'd be too tired to fight, too old to understand what they'd done, but I understood perfectly. The total didn't match the love they preached. Justice turned its face from me. That's what it felt like the moment I stepped into the lawyer's office, the one Daniel had trusted for years. His name was Mr. Collins, a man who had known our family long enough to pretend concern while calculating advantage. The waiting room smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, left too long on a burner. The clock on the wall ticked unevenly, its second hand pausing before each reluctant move forward. Even time, it seemed, didn't want to cooperate. He rose from behind a wide oak desk, briefcase already open beside him. "I'm sorry about Daniel," he said softly. "He was one of the good ones." "He was," I replied. "That's why I'm here. I need help protecting what he left." "Of course. We'll get to the bottom of this." He gestured to the chair opposite him. As I sat, the overhead light flickered, once, twice, before steadying into a pale hum. Papers cluttered his desk in uneven stacks. I noticed my folder sitting beneath a pile marked urgent. Mine had no such label. He opened it halfway, skimmed the first few pages, then closed it again. "There's an issue with documentation," he said. "Your husband's accounts, the signatures, they're complicated." "They're forged," I said. He smiled gently, the way people smile when they want to look patient. "That's a serious claim." "It's a serious theft." He leaned back. "You'll need evidence admissible under estate law. Without clear proof, this could drag on for years." "I have bank records, a witness." "Which institution?" "First National. Reference entry F27A. His expression shifted for a moment, something quick and uneasy. He covered it by rearranging the papers. "Let me handle communication with the bank," he said. "You shouldn't get directly involved." There was a tone beneath his voice I recognized now, ownership disguised as help. Daniel once warned me that people who protect legacies often mean their own. I studied him. "You knew Mark was executor, didn't you?" "Your brother-in-law?" "Yes, only formally. Estates require someone designated." "And if that someone changes documents?" He hesitated, then reached for his pen. "Let's not assume wrongdoing. Let's not assume honesty either." He looked up sharply. For the first time, the room felt smaller. The flicker returned, the light shivering across his glasses. His reflection in them was faint and distorted, like truth bent through glass. He sighed. "Look, I'll draft a motion for review, but these things take time." "How long?" "Months, maybe longer." "How many clients do you have ahead of me?" He smiled again. "I can't disclose that." I understood. My husband's death was yesterday's news, and I was yesterday's client. He would delay, and time would bury the paper trail deeper each week. The flickering light dimmed once more. I stood. "I'll need a copy of everything I signed today." "That's unnecessary. It's necessary for me." He handed over 2 sheets. My name appeared beside his initials, confirming representation. But beneath it, in faint type, I saw a clause. Power to manage related correspondence at attorney's discretion. My hand clenched. This allows you to intercept mail. Standard phrasing, he said smoothly. For who? The innocent or the guilty? He looked at me, then at the clock. You're upset. Let's reconvene when things settle. No, I'll settle this myself. I gathered my papers and left. Outside, the afternoon light was harsh, reflecting off car windows and glass doors. It felt too bright for what I'd just learned, that even the law has blind spots carved by greed. At the corner cafe, I opened my folder again. My file was thinner than before. A note sat tucked between pages, in handwriting I didn't recognize. Be patient. This will resolve quietly. Quiet. That word again. The same one they used at the clinic. Quiet meant submission. Quiet meant lose your rights one form at a time. I stared at the note. The letters slanted right as if written in haste. The ink was slightly smudged, still fresh. My stomach turned. They were already moving faster than me. I returned home, sat by the kitchen clock, and wrote a new letter by hand, my first formal complaint. I cited his name, the date, and the clause that granted him access to my correspondence. I described the delays, the dismissals, the warnings disguised as care. I sealed it, marked it for delivery, and placed it beside the ticking clock. The flickering light from earlier replayed in my mind, pulsing like a warning signal. I finally understood what it meant. Justice doesn't turn away. It just gets sold. He said, patience, but sold my silence. I mailed it with shaking hands. The letter wasn't long, just 3 paragraphs, but every word carried the weight of a life I was taking back. The paper felt heavier than it should, warm beneath my palms from the candle burning beside me. The heat clung to my fingers, as though the page itself could feel what I was doing, undoing years of silence, erasing the permissions they had written for me without my consent. The wax on the table flickered, throwing tiny shadows that trembled across the kitchen wall. Outside, the street was quiet, still wet from last night's rain. I could hear the faint hum of a car engine somewhere far off. Time seemed to hold its breath as I sealed the envelope. I wrote each word carefully. This notice formally revokes all prior authorizations granted under power of attorney, effective immediately. It sounded clinical, almost cold, but I knew that inside those lines hid something raw, defiance. I pressed my signature at the bottom, steady now, bold and full. The pen's tip scratched against the paper with a sound that reminded me of a match being struck. One mark to burn their control away. I folded the letter, slipped it into the envelope, and held it over the candle flame, not close enough to burn, but close enough to feel the heat pulse through the wax. My heart was louder than the ticking clock on the wall. That clock had become a witness to everything, every insult wrapped in kindness, every meeting they called for your sake. I thought of Mark, his careful voice pretending reason, and of Mr. Collins, telling me to be patient while he built his wall of delay. They had mistaken patience for surrender. I blew out the candle. Smoke curled upward, a thin gray ribbon twisting into the ceiling like a final prayer. At the post office, the air smelled faintly of dust and ink. The clerk behind the counter, a man with thinning hair and soft eyes, glanced at the envelope. Certified or standard? Certified, I said. I need confirmation they received it. He nodded and reached for a small rubber stamp. The sound of it hitting paper, sharp, decisive, felt like a verdict. He hesitated before handing me the receipt. Everything all right, ma'am? Yes, I said. Finally. He slid the envelope into the outgoing tray, among dozens of ordinary letters bound for birthdays, bills, and small apologies. Mine was different. Mine was a declaration. Walking out, I could feel the cold air bite at my skin, the shift between warmth and wind almost electric. I clutched the stamped copy against my chest, proof of my decision, the faint heat still trapped beneath the paper from when it left my hands. On the way home, I caught my reflection in a shop window. Pale, determined, older but not defeated. For the first time, I didn't look like someone waiting for approval. I looked like someone who had stopped asking for it. The letter would reach them by morning. They'd read it over breakfast, their faces twisting, realizing that the woman they had dismissed as fragile had learned the language of boundaries. I imagined the scene, the crumpling of paper, the muttered curses, Mark's voice rising in disbelief. She can't do this. But I could. I already had. The postmark on the receipt read 9:42 a.m., reference P19B. I traced it with my thumb, memorizing the numbers. They felt like coordinates to freedom. At home, I set the candle back on the table. Its wax hardened into uneven ridges. My hands still trembled, not from fear, but from the enormity of what I'd done. The house was silent, almost reverent, as if listening to its walls exhale. For the first time in months, I didn't feel trapped inside someone else's narrative. I had mailed a letter, but what I'd really sent was a warning. The wax cooled before my fear did. They called until the night bled into morning. At first, I thought it was a mistake, a wrong number, maybe. But when the phone rang again and again and again, I knew it wasn't confusion. It was strategy. The kind that comes wrapped in false pity and hidden malice. The kind that wears concern like perfume. Each call began the same way, silence, then breathing. Sometimes a soft sigh, sometimes a low chuckle, like someone too close to the receiver. I would hang up, wait, and count. 5 minutes. 10. Then it would start again. By midnight, I had written down every time the phone rang. There were 12 calls before I stopped counting. The sound of that ring, the sharp metallic slice through the dark, became unbearable. The air in the house seemed to pulse with it. The window beside my desk was cracked open, and a faint breeze carried in the damp smell of rain. Beyond the glass, the streetlight flickered, washing the sidewalk in yellow light that kept breaking into shadow. I stared at that light, the way a prisoner might stare at a key, close enough to imagine freedom, too far to reach. I tried to sleep, but the ringing followed me into the quiet. When it finally stopped, I waited in the dark for it to start again. I realized then that silence can be crueler than noise. In the morning, I went to the telecom office. The clerk at the counter looked barely old enough to rent an apartment, but he spoke with the weariness of someone used to angry customers. "Hidden numbers," he said, scrolling through a screen. "Looks like over 40 calls between midnight and 4 a.m. "From where?" He shook his head. "Private routing. Probably from a masked line. It's meant to scare you." "So it's working," I said. He hesitated, lowering his voice. "If you want, I can mark it as harassment. That'll flag it for the system. But I can't stop the calls unless there's a court order." "Then mark it." He typed for a moment, then handed me a printout. Reference H92C. "Keep this," he said. "It logs every call. Proof matters." I nodded. Proof always matters. On the way home, the phone buzzed in my purse. I didn't answer, not yet. The city around me looked normal, people talking, traffic lights blinking, the world pretending to be safe. But inside that ringing was a voice I couldn't hear yet, a promise that they were close. By afternoon, the calls started again, one after another, in bursts of 3 or 4. I unplugged the main line once, but the silence that followed felt worse, like they had stepped closer, pressed against the glass just outside the window. I plugged it back in. I needed the sound. I needed the record. When I picked up on the 12th ring, the line crackled faintly, then a whisper. "You should have stayed quiet." I froze. Who is this? Nothing, just static. Then the faint replay of my own voice, words I'd spoken earlier that day to the clerk. Proof always matters. I slammed the phone down, my pulse drumming so loud I could hear it in my throat. The window rattled in its frame as a gust of wind pushed against it. For a second, I thought I saw movement outside, a shadow slipping past the chit's edge. But when I looked again, there was only the flickering light. I called the telecom office again. The same young man answered. "You said these numbers were private," I said. "But they're not random, are they?" He hesitated. "Not random. Someone's routing them through encrypted systems. Honestly, that's not something ordinary people do." "So what do I do?" His tone softened. "Document everything. Don't answer again unless you have to." I almost laughed. "You think I have a choice?" That night, I set the phone on the table beside me and watched it. I didn't touch it when it rang. I just listened. The sound filled the house, echoing through empty rooms. It became a metronome for my thoughts, a reminder that fear can be organized, deliberate, methodical. They wanted me to break, to run, to doubt myself. But if they were calling, it meant I was still the threat they feared most, a woman who knew the truth. The ringing stopped just before dawn. For a few minutes, there was peace. The window glowed faintly with the first weak light of morning. I thought maybe it was over. Then, one last call. Just one. I picked it up slowly, breath held. A click. Then my own voice, steady, distant, unmistakable, played back through the receiver. Proof always matters. I answered once and heard my own voice played back. From her window, she saw too much. At first, I thought it was guilt that kept Mrs. Clark quiet all these months. But sometimes silence isn't about fear. It's about waiting for the right moment to speak. And when she finally did, her words carried the kind of light that doesn't fade easily. The morning she came over, the sun broke through the clouds in sharp, golden lines. It slipped through her lace curtains, scattering patterns across the table between us. I remember how her hands trembled as she set down her teacup. The sound of porcelain against wood was so gentle, yet it felt like a verdict. "I didn't want to get involved," she said, "but I can't unsee what I saw." "What did you see?" I asked, though I already knew. "Your brother-in-law. 2 men I didn't recognize. They came the morning after the funeral. Changed the locks, moved boxes out of your home. I thought maybe it was official business." Official business. That was the phrase they always used, like cruelty came with a letterhead. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I wrote it down," she said. "Dates, times, everything. My nephew helped me format it. He said it should be called an affidavit." The word hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar, like a door unlocking somewhere far away. I took the paper from her and unfolded it. Her handwriting was careful, almost elegant, and the ink had smudged slightly in one corner where her thumb had rested too long. The first line read, "On the morning of June 12th, I observed Mark Evans and 2 unidentified individuals entering the property at 8:47 a.m. The precision of it, the time, the names, hit me like truth finally given form. "Are you sure you want this signed?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "I've been sure for weeks. But people talk here. They'll say I'm meddling." "They'll say worse," I replied, "but this matters." She smiled faintly. "Then let them talk. I'm old enough not to care what they think anymore." Her courage felt contagious. As she signed her name, sunlight shifted across the table, catching the edge of the teacup. The reflection danced across the affidavit like a seal of witness, proof blessed by the very light they once tried to hide from. I could hear neighborhood sounds filtering through her open window, children laughing, a dog barking, the world pretending everything was ordinary. But it wasn't. Her small act of honesty had just turned every curtain in the street into a stage. "They'll know you helped me," I warned. She sipped her tea, unbothered. "Then they'll know I still have eyes and a conscience." I folded the affidavit carefully and slid it into my folder beside the telecom record and the bank statement. 3 pieces now, each different, yet all pointing to the same truth. Patterns never lie. People do. As I stood to leave, Mrs. Clark touched my arm. "I saw what they did to you," she said quietly. "But I also saw that you never begged." I looked at her. Begging was never the problem. Believing them was. Outside, the sun felt harsher than before, bright, almost blinding. For months I had avoided it, pulling curtains shut, keeping my grief tucked in shadow. But now, as I walked home holding that signed paper, I didn't want to hide anymore. The light followed me down the street, reaching across fences, catching the edges of windows where other neighbors pretended not to look. I could feel their stares, their whispered theories blooming like weeds. Every home had its version of truth, but today mine had documentation. When I reached my gate, I paused. The locks, new and polished, glinted in the sunlight. For a moment, I imagined them melting under that light, their metal honesty stripped bare. I opened the folder again, tracing Mrs. Clark's signature with my finger. It wasn't just ink, it was courage turned permanent. That night, I placed the affidavit beside my bed, next to the letter I'd mailed and the bank record. The 3 documents lay there like silent witnesses, waiting for the moment they'd be called upon to speak. Through my own window, I could see the faint glow from hers across the street. One lamp burning behind thin curtains, one truth standing against a sea of silence. Her window became my courtroom. They spoke of forgiveness while holding my sins. The words drifted from the pulpit like incense, sweet, rehearsed, and poisoned. I sat near the back pew, unseen behind a row of bowed heads. Their voices rose in practiced harmony, but the hymn felt hollow, like mercy had been traded for gossip. The air smelled faintly of wax and old wood, the familiar scent of Sundays. It used to calm me once. Now it clung to me like smoke after a fire. I could almost taste the bitterness in it. I heard my name, well, not my name exactly, but something close enough that every whispering tongue knew who they meant. "Those who covet what was not freely given," the pastor said, eyes soft with pity, mouth sharp with intent. Every eye turned, not directly, not all at once, but like wind turning blades of grass. I kept my hands folded tight in my lap. If I moved, even to breathe, they'd think it was confession. After the service, I waited outside. The church steps were cold beneath my palms as I sat there, watching families drift out in tidy groups. Smiles and sermons, handshakes and judgment. That's how it worked here. Faith was just another social contract, and breaking it meant exile. A shadow fell over me. It was Reverend Hale, the only man left in that place whose kindness didn't feel like surveillance. He cleared his throat before speaking. "They asked me to read that message," he said softly. "I didn't write it." "I know," I replied. He hesitated, glancing toward the doors. "They've been pushing their version of things. I thought you should see what's being said in print." He handed me a folded church bulletin. Inside, between announcements for bake sales and youth retreats, was a paragraph that might as well have been carved in stone. "In times of grief, beware the heart that mistakes inheritance for blessing." I stared at the words, simple, polite, condemning. "They wrote this to make sure no one helps me," I said. He sighed. "Some hearts protect power better than they protect truth." The paper smelled faintly of candle wax, warm, sweet, and suffocating. It reminded me of those long vigils after my husband's death, when the same people lighting candles for his soul were already planning the division of what he left behind. I folded the bulletin carefully and slid it into my bag. "Thank you," I said. "Proof takes many forms." He frowned slightly. "Proof? This isn't legal." "No," I said. "It's moral. And that's harder to erase." As I walked down the steps, I could still hear the choir practicing inside, soft voices rising like smoke from the altar. Each note twisted something in me. Not grief, not anger, but something sharper, clarity. They thought faith was theirs to weaponize, that by painting me as greedy, they could cleanse their own theft in public view. But faith isn't a ledger. It keeps its own record, written in the silence after lies. Halfway down the path, a group of parishioners stopped talking when they saw me. Their eyes dipped, their smiles faltered. One woman clutched her purse tighter. Another offered a thin, guilty nod. They didn't know where to stand, in sympathy or in fear of being seen with me. "Morning," I said evenly. My voice didn't shake. They murmured a reply, one of those polite nothings meant to end conversation. As I reached the gate, I heard one of them whisper, "She looks different now." I almost laughed. They were right. I was different. At home, I placed the bulletin beside the affidavit and telecom log. 3 proofs, 3 betrayals, 3 ways they tried to make me small. But truth isn't cumulative. It's catalytic. That evening, I lit a small candle. Not for prayer, not for peace, but to remember. The wax melted slowly, pooling around the base like time itself giving way. The flame's glow caught the edge of the bulletin, turning its printed condemnation to gold for just a moment before fading again. They thought they could own the story, twist it from the pulpit, and leave me to burn in silence. But they forgot something. Faith listens. Faith remembers. They forgot faith has its own witnesses. They froze me like I was dead. No warning, no call, just a screen that said, "Account suspended, pending family dispute review." Those words looked harmless, typed in neat blue letters, but to me, they felt like a gravestone. I tried the card again, as if disbelief might undo the truth. The machine whirred, paused, then spat it out. The edge of the plastic cracked where it hit the slot. I ran my thumb over it, the texture rough now, proof of rejection, small but permanent. Inside the bank, the air smelled of paper and quiet authority. The manager's smile was polished, the kind reserved for inconvenient customers. "There seems to be a procedural hold, ma'am," he said. "Nothing personal." "Nothing personal?" I repeated. "You froze my life." He blinked, surprised that I wasn't whispering. "A legal request was filed. Your family's counsel. It's standard until verification is complete." "Verification of what?" He shuffled some papers. "Ownership? Intent? Stability?" "Stability," I said, letting the word hang. "You mean sanity?" For a moment he looked guilty. Then the mask returned. "I can't discuss internal notes." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had been building. Letters, affidavits, stamped envelopes. "Then I'll discuss them for you," I said. "Every line of proof you've ignored has a signature attached, and I'm not leaving until you show me who authorized this." He hesitated, then glanced toward a small window where a younger employee watched, pretending not to listen. "Mrs. He caught himself. "Ma'am, I suggest you take this through official complaint channels." "I am the complaint," I said quietly. Behind me, a cough. The arbiter, my ally in this bureaucratic war, had followed me inside. He worked in ethics compliance, and his presence carried the kind of weight that turned procedure into conscience. "Show her the file," he told the manager. "I can't." "You can," he interrupted. "Regulation 14B allows for disclosure when identity conflict arises from falsified claims." The manager swallowed hard, then opened a drawer. A sheet of paper slid across the desk, trembling slightly under his hand. At the top, the bank's logo. Below it, numbers. 2 of them circled. $6,700 flagged, $6,700 transferred. I stared at the figures, cold and exact. Transferred to whom? He looked down. A secondary executor on the estate file. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because rage needed somewhere to go. Executor. They gave themselves permission to steal. The arbiter leaned closer. "You'll need this document. It's reference N31C. Keep it sealed for now." I took the notice, the paper stiff and dry under my fingers. "They think freezing me means erasing me," I said. "But systems keep logs. Systems remember." He nodded. "We'll escalate this to the audit committee. They've crossed into ethical violation territory." "And what will that change?" I asked. "It will put them under light," he replied. "And light burns slowly, but it burns clean." As we stepped outside, The cold air hit hard, slicing through the static of fluorescent ceilings and scripted apologies. I stood on the curb, holding the broken card between my fingers. The embossed name, my name, caught the sunlight for a moment before dulling again. It used to mean access, identity, trust. Now it was just a piece of plastic, brittle, cracked, stripped of value. Still, I couldn't throw it away. Relics aren't always holy. Some are just reminders of the wars we never wanted but had to fight. The arbiter handed me a second envelope. "Internal copy of the suspension order," he said. "Keep it safe. It's your next step." I opened it halfway, scanning the lines. Legal jargon, approval codes, time-stamped signatures. But one detail froze me more than the card had. The printed note at the bottom. Actioned automatically after client verification timeout. No one had even pressed the button. The system had erased me by itself. I looked back through the glass doors. The manager stood in the lobby, head bowed over his screen, pretending not to see me. But the reflection on that glass told another story, his own eyes glancing up every few seconds, waiting for me to disappear. The world doesn't need monsters when it has policies. I tucked the cracked card into my folder beside the affidavit and the letter. Each piece was another layer of proof, another weapon dressed as paperwork. My fingers still felt the ridged texture of the plastic, faint and sharp like a scar that wouldn't smooth over. A bus passed, its reflection cutting through mine in the window, splitting me into fragments of light and shadow. For a moment I thought of how easily identity could vanish, how names could be deleted, accounts locked, lives paused mid-sentence. But I wasn't done. Systems fail, yes, but people still answer for what they hide behind them. My name vanished before their system refreshed. They said this was mediation, not justice. The word mediation sounded gentle enough, as if fairness could be negotiated like a contract. But the air inside that room was colder than fairness, sharpened by metal chairs and fluorescent lights that made every flaw visible. We sat on opposite sides of a long table. My family, what was left of it, looked smaller than I remembered, their faces drawn from too many sleepless nights or too much comfort in lies. The walls carried every sound, the scrape of a chair, the tap of a pen, the deliberate clearing of a throat. The arbiter sat between us, a man whose calm was a profession. "We're here to resolve matters amicably," he said. "This isn't about punishment." I almost smiled. "Then, what is it about?" He paused. "Closure." Across from me, Mark kept his eyes down, fingers tight around a folder too thin to hold truth. My sister-in-law glanced at him, waiting for a cue that didn't come. Even here, she let men decide when she could speak. The hearing secretary pressed record on the device beside her, and a small red light blinked. The cold air from the vent above my head brushed across my hands, raising goosebumps. It felt like judgment in physical form. The arbiter began reading from the summary, dry, official, rehearsed. The claimant asserts unauthorized transfer of assets totaling $6,700 from joint accounts, followed by misrepresentation of property rights and withholding of legal correspondence. He turned to me. "Do you confirm these events as filed in your statement?" "Yes," I said, voice steady, "and I have proof." I opened my folder and laid the documents across the table. The affidavit from Mrs. Clark, the telecom record, the church bulletin, the banking notice, 4 pieces, 4 scars, all written in language too polite to show what it cost me to collect them. The arbiter nodded once, marking reference R12A on his pad. "Your documentation will be reviewed for authenticity," he said. "They already are," I replied. "Each one was verified through your institution's chain." Mark finally spoke. "She's twisting everything. These were mutual decisions, family arrangements. We were trying to protect her from herself." "Protect me?" I asked. He shrugged. "You weren't coping well after Daniel's passing." The arbiter's eyes flicked to me, measuring my restraint. I kept my tone even. "Grief doesn't cancel ownership or memory." My sister-in-law leaned forward. "You're making us out to be thieves." "I'm not making you anything," I said. "You did that yourselves." The pen in her hand trembled slightly, tapping the table with soft, uneven beats. The rhythm filled the silence like a metronome of guilt. The arbiter cleared his throat. "Let's keep emotions tempered. We're here for resolution." "I've been tempered for months," I said quietly. "It's how I survived your system." He wrote something on his sheet, maybe noting tone, maybe composure. I didn't care which. Behind me, the vent hissed again, releasing another gust of cold air that swept across the room. For a brief moment, it felt cleansing, as if the air itself refused to side with the liars. The secretary read back portions of the record, confirming every word for the hearing file. Time, date, location, participants. She said my name once, then the phrase, "spoke with clarity and resolve." I wanted to ask her to read that part again, just to hear it in the sterile quiet of the room. Mark looked up, eyes narrowing. "You think this makes you noble?" "No," I said. "It just makes me seen." The arbiter held up a hand. "Enough. The record will stand as submitted. I advise all parties to refrain from further statements until the next session." They rose first, collecting their papers in hurried motions, avoiding my gaze. I stayed seated, fingers resting on the folder that now held both proof and peace. When the room emptied, the arbiter lingered. "You kept calm," he said. "Not many could." "Calm is just what's left when anger burns clean," I replied. He smiled faintly, signing off the record with a slow, deliberate stroke. "This transcript will go to oversight review. It's reference H45D. Keep that number safe." "I will." As I stood, the cold followed me down the corridor, whispering through vents and open doorways. I passed a mirror and caught my reflection. Tired, yes, but unbroken. The building's lights hummed above me, pale and merciless. For the first time, I didn't look away. Because truth, when cornered, doesn't hide. It waits. The truth waited under fluorescent light. They didn't expect the crowd. By noon, every seat in the courtroom was filled. Neighbors, reporters, faces I hadn't seen in years. Whispers rippled like wind through wheat, a restless sound that carried equal parts curiosity and justice. They had come to watch what the family tried so hard to bury. The air was sharp with tension, warmed by the glare of the lights that seemed to expose everything, the sweat on foreheads, the trembling of hands, the weight of truth finally being measured. At the front, the judge adjusted her glasses, voice steady. "This hearing concerns the authenticity of the estate transfer documents submitted under file entry C-27. She looked toward my nephew. "You're still under oath." He nodded, throat dry. "Yes, Your Honor." The paper stack on the clerk's desk looked harmless, almost ordinary, but I knew it held years of deceit. Every sheet was another attempt to erase me, line by line, signature by signature. The arbiter sat beside me, calm and poised. "This is the culmination," he whispered. "Stay centered." "I've been centered for too long," I said quietly. The witness was called, Mrs. Clark. She took the stand, hands shaking as she raised the oath card. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" "I do." Her voice trembled at first, but strength found her as she began to recount what she had seen, who entered the house the night before the locks were changed, who carried the boxes marked personal, who forged the papers that redefined ownership as theft. Across the aisle, my nephew's lawyer objected, but the judge cut him off. "Objection overruled. Continue." Mrs. Clark took a deep breath. "The signature on that deed, it wasn't hers. I saw him practicing it, twice, on yellow paper." Gasps fluttered across the room. My nephew's face drained of color. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering something urgent. The lawyer shook his head slowly. The judge turned to the clerk. "Bring Exhibit 3. A manila folder was placed on the table before her. Inside it, one sheet. My husband's signature, forged so neatly it fooled a bank, a lawyer, and half my bloodline. But not me. The arbiter rose. "Your Honor, this document was verified by handwriting analysis reference L19B. The results confirm forgery with 98% probability. The judge's eyes moved to my nephew. Do you have anything to say before I read this into record? He opened his mouth, but no words came. The silence that followed was heavier than accusation. You could hear the tick of the courtroom clock, the scrape of a pen being set down. They told me you'd never find out, Mrs. Clark said softly, eyes glistening. But lies rot faster than guilt. I met her gaze and nodded once. Forgiveness wasn't immediate, but recognition was enough. The judge spoke again. Given the verified evidence and testimony, this court finds the transfer invalid. All assets and authority are hereby restored to their rightful owner. The forged signature constitutes fraud under state law. The sound of the gavel struck through the air, a sharp, clean echo that felt like the end of a long, poisoned chapter. The crowd murmured. Reporters scribbled. But I sat still, letting the sound wash through me. The harsh glare of the courtroom lights blurred for a moment, haloing the judge's bench like something divine, or maybe just fair. My nephew slumped forward, head in his hands. His sister reached for him, but he pulled away. The same hands that once held mine when he was a child now trembled under the weight of exposure. I gathered my papers carefully. Each document, once weaponized against me, now turned into a shield. Proof, I murmured, is patient. The arbiter placed a copy of the verdict beside me. This will close the institutional file. You've won. No, I said. I've survived. He hesitated, then nodded. Survival is its own victory. When I stepped outside, the air felt different, still cold, but lighter. The crowd parted, not in pity, but in quiet respect. Cameras flashed, but I didn't flinch. After so long in shadow, light didn't scare me anymore. Somewhere behind me, the clerk called out to confirm the transcript record. Proceedings concluded at 3:47 p.m. I smiled faintly. Numbers. Cold, simple, incorruptible. As I reached the courthouse steps, I looked back one last time. The gavel had already fallen, but its sound lingered, not as noise, but as truth finding its shape in the air. The echo of the gavel stayed longer than applause. They finally read what I once begged them to hear. The paper was taped cleanly across the wooden door, official, stamped, and final. The seal glimmered faintly in the morning light, its ink still ridged and fresh. For the first time in years, the words on that door spoke truth instead of threat. 2 officers stood nearby, their posture quiet but firm. One of them nodded to me before stepping aside. "It's done," he said. "They've been served." I moved closer, fingers brushing the embossed crest, tracing the texture of justice. The ink caught faintly against my skin, cool and raised like a scar that had finally healed right. Inside, the house was silent. Windows still covered in the same curtains I had chosen years ago, the same hallway where laughter once lived. But the silence no longer accused me. It just existed, honest and empty. The protector, my ally through every hearing, every proof, every cruel delay, stood beside me. "You want to go in?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "No, let it stay as it is." He unfolded a copy of the order, its lines neat and absolute. Eviction enforced by court authority under Notice ID P41A. Legal words, stripped of feeling, but each one carried weight enough to steady my breathing. "They'll collect their things tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow belongs to the living," I murmured. For a moment, I thought I heard echoes from the past, the thud of boxes carried out, the locks changing, my name erased from utility bills like I had never existed. But now, the names on those lines would change again. This time, back to where they belonged. A small crowd had gathered across the street. Neighbors who once whispered behind windows now watched openly. Some nodded, others looked away. I didn't blame them. Guilt was a quiet spectator sport. One woman called out softly, "I'm glad you didn't give up." I turned just enough to meet her eyes. Neither did truth. The protector handed me the spare copy. "Keep this for your records," he said. I folded it carefully, pressing the crease along the seal. "No," I said, "for my memory." Smiled faintly. "You've done something most don't. You stayed." "I had nowhere else to stand," I replied. The sunlight caught the ink again, revealing faint ridges where the seal had pressed down. My fingers brushed over it one last time, and I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, not relief, but calm, like the world had stopped holding its breath. Behind us, the officers removed the temporary barricade. The sound of metal scraping against stone echoed through the street, marking the official end of a long, bitter season. I looked at the house, its paint chipped, its windows clouded, but I didn't see loss anymore. I saw a lesson carved into every surface. That silence can hold its ground longer than shouting, and that patience, when paired with proof, becomes power. "Do you want to say anything before we go?" the protector asked. "Yes," I said, turning to face the door. "Thank you for teaching me what justice feels like, not what it looks like." The badge on the officer's chest caught the light as he pinned a small verification slip beneath the main notice. The sound of the tape pressing down was final, unceremonious. Yet it felt ceremonial, like the last nail sealing an old wound. I stepped back. The house seemed smaller now, almost human in its stillness. I thought of all the nights I'd stood on this same porch begging someone, anyone, to listen. Now it listened back, in silence, with dignity restored. The protector spoke again. "You'll want to get some rest." "I will," I said. "But first, I'll walk home." He hesitated. "You mean away from here?" "Exactly." I took one last look at the door, the seal, the ink, the sunlight resting against the frame. Then I turned toward the street, where the day waited without judgment. Every step forward felt like reclaiming something they'd tried to steal. Not property, not money, but peace. The wind lifted slightly, catching the edge of the notice, making it flutter like a flag of quiet victory. I walked away without turning back. No one cheered when the truth stood naked. The verdict had already passed, yet the day after felt louder in its quiet than any courtroom ever could. The newspaper came folded neatly on the front steps, ink-smudged, weightless, and heavy all at once. Its headline didn't name names. It simply read, "Inquiry confirms fraudulent estate transfer nullified." No adjectives, no dramatics, just truth, stripped of disguise. I sat on the wooden bench outside the courthouse, the same one I had leaned against through endless hearings. The sun hung low, pale, and distant. Around me, people moved slower than usual, speaking in half-whispers, as though afraid to disturb something sacred. Mrs. Clark walked past with her grocery bag and paused. She didn't speak, only nodded. Once, softly. That was enough. The woman who had seen too much had finally been seen herself. Opened the folded paper. The ink smelled faintly of oil and metal, sharp, grounded, real. My fingers caught on the ridge of a printed line, tracing the words until they blurred slightly in the light. The article quoted evidence entry F09C, the verified transcript of the forged signature. Seeing it there, printed for everyone to read, was like touching a scar that no longer hurt. They printed it clean, the witness had promised. No embellishments, no pity. And he was right. The journalist had written it the way justice should sound, measured, factual, unflinching. It didn't need applause. It only needed air. Across the street, a man lowered his hat as he passed. I didn't know him, but I knew the look. Recognition mixed with quiet respect. Once, those glances had been heavy with suspicion. Now they carried something lighter, acknowledgement, perhaps even apology. A faint breeze lifted the edge of the newspaper, fluttering it like a slow heartbeat. I folded it back carefully, pressing the crease flat across the headline. That sound, the gentle rustle of paper, was the only sound left. Silence had grown roots here, stretching through the street, through every doorway that once held whispers about me. I thought of the days when silence had been my enemy, when it meant isolation, judgment, exile. Now it felt different. Now it was mine. The witness joined me, setting down his own copy beside mine. "They'll remember this," he said quietly. "Maybe," I answered, "but I didn't fight to be remembered. I fought to be believed." He nodded. "Still, belief has a way of echoing." We sat without speaking for a while, listening to nothing. The sound of silence was fuller than I imagined. It wasn't empty, it was earned. The wind carried faint snippets of conversation from across the square. Someone mentioned the trial. Another said, "It's over now." A third replied, "No, it's right now." Their words dissolved into the hush. I closed my eyes and let it sink in, the weight of everything that had been taken, then returned, not as property, but as peace. The witness rose to leave. "They're waiting for a statement from you," he said. "I've given enough words," I replied. "Let the silence speak." He smiled faintly, tipping his head before walking away. The bench creaked beneath me, old wood settling like it knew the story too. For years I had measured my worth by the noise others made about me, the accusations, the gossip, the courtroom murmurs. Now I realized the only sound that mattered was the absence of them. The newspaper rested beside me, its ink catching sunlight before fading again into matte gray. The breeze turned the page once more, revealing a smaller article near the corner. Court praises restraint and composure during proceedings. I almost laughed. Restraint, composure. Words I had worn like armor until they finally became my skin. Children's laughter drifted faintly from a nearby park, soft, unburdened, distant. It folded itself neatly into the silence, no longer a contrast, but a complement. Life continued, unshaken. I ran my hand along the bench's worn edge, feeling the grooves where years had carved patience into wood. Somewhere behind me, a church bell struck once. Clear, solitary, final. The world didn't celebrate justice that day. It didn't need to. The absence of noise was the celebration. As I stood, the folded newspaper slipped slightly from my lap. I caught it before it hit the ground, smoothing the page as if protecting what little piece paper could hold. When I finally walked away, I didn't look back at the courthouse or the headlines. I didn't need proof anymore. Truth, once buried, had found its own voice, and it didn't need to shout. Silence, at last, was on my side. I planted forgiveness where the locks once turned. The soil was soft that morning, darker than I remembered, damp with early rain. My hands sank into it slowly, careful, like touching memory. The scent rose gentle and raw, earth, rain, and renewal braided together. The cottage I'd rented stood beyond a narrow gate painted white, its hinges creaking with a sound that reminded me of honesty. No gold handles, no polished marble. Just a gate, plain and open. I liked that. The gatekeeper, a wiry man with quiet eyes, had met me at dawn to hand over the permit slip. "You're cleared to cultivate up to 200 square feet," he said, the paper trembling slightly between us. The printed line read my name, correctly spelled, officially stamped, finally mine again. I folded it carefully. "You have no idea how long I waited to see it printed right." He smiled faintly. "Names take root when truth does." The garden behind the cottage had once been neglected, overgrown with thorned vines and brittle weeds. I cleared them piece by piece, filling 2 heavy bags before the sun reached its height. The count wasn't important. The act was. Every handful of soil turned felt like reclaiming something invisible. When I rested, I pressed my palm flat to the ground. The soil's scent deepened, grounding me. I realized forgiveness didn't live in grand gestures. It lived here, beneath fingernails, in the dirt that never judged who touched it. At noon, the gatekeeper returned with a clipboard. "Community wants to include your patch in the spring register," he said. "You'll need to fill out Section C." I took the form, reading through the neat boxes. Name, address, permit ID. Ordinary fields. Yet they felt like vows. For years, paperwork had been my undoing. Contracts rewritten, signatures stolen, records erased. Now, a single sheet restored what deceit had stolen. A simple document had done what apologies never could. Section C, I asked. He pointed. Purpose of plot. I wrote, restoration. He glanced down, then looked up with something like approval. Not many choose that word. Because most chase outcomes, I said. I'm learning to chase peace. Later, I unpacked the small seed packets from my bag, parsley, mint, and wildflowers mixed without design. Each packet had been marked in the store with the same price, $2.50. Two small numbers that felt like faith, not cost. As I tore the first one open, a faint breeze carried the scent of the soil again, rich, steady, patient. I remembered the dust from the old house, the sterile air of courtrooms, the sharp scent of paper and ink. Those belonged to endings, this belonged to beginnings. A few neighbors stopped by as I worked, curiosity disguised as friendliness. New tenant? One asked. Just someone rebuilding, I replied. Good spot, she said. Quiet. Quiet's the reward, I said softly. By evening, the ground was dotted with shallow furrows. I knelt to pat them closed, palm over palm, feeling each patch seal like an oath. The sky dimmed, but I didn't rush. Growth doesn't need witness, it needs time. The gatekeeper called out from the path. You'll want to close the gate soon. Foxes come by after dark. I'll let them pass, I said. Everything finds its way eventually. He chuckled lightly. You talk like someone who's finished something big. No, I said, like someone who finally started. As the last of the light faded, I stood by the gate and looked at the small patch of earth behind me. The soil, freshly turned, glistened faintly. The scent still lingered, humble, forgiving, alive. I realized healing wasn't about erasing the house I lost. It was about planting something in its shadow that could still grow. The locks that once shut me out had taught me how to open again, from the inside this time. I hung the permit slip beside the gate where anyone passing could see it, a simple notice that said I belonged here, lawfully, rightfully, quietly. The night air cooled. I brushed the dirt from my hands and closed the gate behind me, the latch clicking with a sound softer than closure, more like promise. I turned once toward the garden, breathing in the damp air, the faint trace of life stirring beneath. Roots remember what walls forget. I wrote to the woman I used to be. The paper in front of me looked softer than it did years ago, its edges no longer sharp with fear. The ink pen trembled slightly in my hand, not from hesitation, but from memory. Sunlight filtered through the window, landing across the desk in a pale, forgiving glow. It caught on the glass edge of the mirror beside me, the same mirror that had once reflected a stranger I could barely meet. I began slowly. Dear me, I wrote, you were right to leave when they said you couldn't. You were right to fight when they told you to sit still. Each word felt like stitching a wound that had already healed, but still remembered its ache. Beside the paper lay the old certified envelope, yellowed, sealed again, its reference code faintly visible. Archived mail entry, M13C. I had found it yesterday while clearing a drawer, the letter that started everything, the one I sent when I was desperate to prove my own truth. I had forgotten the handwriting, how neat it was, how steady despite the chaos surrounding it. The protector had called earlier. You sure you want to reopen that chapter? He asked. It isn't reopening, I said. It's honoring. Now as I traced the ridged seal with my fingertip, I could almost hear her, the woman who wrote it, whispering across time. Don't forget who you are. The mirror beside me caught the afternoon light again, scattering it softly across the wall. Light had been cruel once, exposing every bruise, every doubt. Today it was different. It just existed, warm and impartial. I unfolded the old letter carefully. The first line stopped me cold. "If no one believes you, write anyway." I remembered the night I sent it, sitting by a lamp that flickered with every gust of wind, heart pounding as I wrote, "They have taken everything with paper. I will take it back the same way." It wasn't poetry. It was survival. Reading it now, I smiled. "You had no idea, did you?" I whispered to that past self. "You thought justice was far away, but it was waiting in your handwriting." The protector had always said, "Evidence is the language of courage." He was half right. It was also the language of faith, the belief that truth, written down, would one day be heard. I set the old letter beside the new one, the ink still wet. My reflection in the mirror looked older, yes, but also calmer. Time had added what fear once took away, gentleness. "Do you forgive me?" I said aloud, not to anyone else, but to the ghost of myself who had lived inside those sentences. The silence in the room answered like a nod. I signed the bottom of the new page, "Yours, without apology." The act felt ceremonial. Closure didn't arrive with applause or verdicts. It arrived with the quiet scratch of a pen against paper. Outside, the world carried on. Cars passing, leaves brushing against the glass, the muted rhythm of ordinary life. I listened for a moment, letting it steady me. The sound was proof that peace doesn't shout. The protector texted me one last time. "Did you finish it?" I typed back, "Yes, I'm mailing it to myself." He replied, "Then it'll never get lost again." I folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, sealing it with a small press of my thumb. The gesture felt sacred, final, but alive. The faint glow from the window touched the page as if approving, leaving a sliver of light across my name. I turned toward the mirror once more. The woman looking back wasn't waiting for permission anymore. She wasn't pleading for belief. She was simply present, still, aware, whole. The envelope sat beside the old one, two timelines side by side. The ink from both shimmered faintly under the light, like quiet heartbeats answering each other across years. I whispered, "Thank you for not giving up." And as the light settled over the paper, soft and steady, I felt it. The pulse beneath the ink, the proof that what I wrote once in fear now lived in peace. Her handwriting felt like a heartbeat. The locks never changed. Only I did. Dawn stretched thin across the street, the first light slipping over rooftops and catching on the glass panes of the house I once called mine. I stood on the opposite curb, wrapped in my coat, watching as a moving truck idled in the driveway. A family unloaded boxes, voices soft, laughter rising, the sound of life continuing where my silence had once lived. The door, polished and freshly painted, gleamed in the new light. I could still see the faint outline where the old number plate used to hang crooked, the same one I'd tightened exactly 2 times before everything began to unravel. That was years ago, though the memory stayed sharp. How I'd once stood there with keys trembling in my hand, waiting for permission to enter a life I already owned. Now, standing here, I realized I didn't need those keys anymore. The arbiter had called last week about a final community survey, something to evaluate closure, as they phrased it. Bureaucracy trying to measure healing, as if peace could be scored. Still, I filled it out. 12 questions, 2 signature lines, 1 final checkmark beside resolved. I mailed it back without a second thought. Today, the arbiter sent a brief note. Case finalized under community compliance. Simple, procedural, yet to me, it felt like a benediction. The new family's children ran up the path, their shoes scattering gravel across the steps. I smiled as one of them tripped and laughed it off. Once, that sound might have pierced me, joy where pain had lived, but now it soothed. The house no longer owed me its silence. A neighbor passed by, the same one who used to avoid my eyes during the hearings. He lifted a hand slightly. I returned the gesture. No words exchanged, but recognition, quiet and clean. For years, I had measured belonging by thresholds, doors I could or couldn't cross, rooms that echoed with accusations, walls that held secrets tighter than truth. But standing here, on this side of the street, I understood. Belonging was never a location. It was endurance. The light shifted, a beam touching the old front door. It wasn't cruel or nostalgic. It was neutral, like dawn itself. The same sunlight that once revealed my eviction now blessed the home of strangers. Time had rewritten the scene without asking for my permission. I whispered to myself, "You don't belong in that house." The words once used against me now sounded like release. The arbiter had warned me months ago, returning can stir resentment. I'd answered, "Not if I've already forgiven." Forgiveness wasn't a transaction. It was surrendering the illusion that justice must hurt someone else to feel real. I'd learned that here, across the street, not inside the courtroom or the hearing room. A car door slammed softly nearby, pulling me back. The family waved at their new neighbors, unaware that the ground beneath their feet had once been my battlefield. I hoped they'd never know. Some stories are meant to stay buried under foundations that no longer crack. The survey copy still sat folded in my coat pocket, creased and smudged. I unfolded it once more, glancing at the final field. Outcome: personal resolution achieved? I'd checked, yes. I traced the box with my finger, feeling the faint indentation of the pen. Proof didn't always live in records or seals. It lived in stillness like this. The door across the street opened wide, flooding the hallway with light. I remembered how that same doorway had once felt like judgment. Now it looked like peace. A single line of sunlight reached my shoes. I stepped back instinctively, smiling at the thought that I didn't need to enter to feel home anymore. In the reflection of a nearby window, I caught my own face, tired, steady, alive. I thought of every chapter that led here, the betrayal, the trials, the nights I spoke to silence and heard nothing back. Now the silence answered, not as punishment, but as calm. I turned away, the dawn light soft on my shoulders. Somewhere behind me, a child's laughter carried again, mixing with the faint hum of the moving truck pulling off the curb. I walked slowly down the street, no longer looking back. The locks never changed, only I did. Belonging was never a place, it was me.